Hello makers and crafters, puppet masters, greater creators, and theatrical fabricators. My name's Geahk, spelled like Geahk, here with another video, tutorial time.
So I have a little problem. I have this futon part that broke, and here's what it looks like when it's not broken. It's got a little nut kind of buried deep inside, and this screw goes in to about halfway or so and attaches to that nut. And this is part of the sliding mechanism so the futon can transform from a bed to a couch. Now, the problem is getting a new one of these costs $28, which I'm not really willing to spend. So I'm just going to make a new one, and I'm going to teach you guys how to make a mold and how to cast a new one if you run into the same situation. It doesn't have to be a part like this. This is really just a way to fix almost anything that has a broken part. If you can figure out how the original was made and cast a duplicate, then you save yourself some money and you learn something. So let's do that. Pretty easy to do, and I think I can do it in about 2.5 or 3 hours. So first, let's take a close look at the original part to see what we can determine about it. The first thing that we probably notice is that it's very shiny. I can tell you from feeling it, it's very slick. So this is some kind of aciatal plastic. This is something that is impregnated with some material that makes it extra slippery. That's a little bit of a problem because I can't quite reproduce this in exactly the same slipperiness as this has been made. Not without buying new materials. And the whole idea is that I'm trying to replace this without buying a new part. So the part that I replace it with probably won't be quite this slippery. But one of the things that's noticed is that the original that broke has these really bad air pockets in it. There's a reason it broke. You can see that it's not made of very good plastic. It looks like it probably wasn't heated up to its full temperature. It's probably made in a very mass-produced environment. So this is a cheaply used plastic. It may even be a recycled plastic. It kind of looks like it might be, milk carton or a milk jug plastic or, something along those lines. Maybe even recycled plastic bags. It's really sort of like barely melted and then pressed back together. It kind of appears to be. But one of the things that we do have the advantage of is we can see how the nut sits inside there. It was just cast directly into the plastic. And we can see, not on that side, but on this side, the injection molding pins. And these injection pins tell you a couple of things about how the mold was made. Well, the first thing, we can find the parting line. Right along here, you can see that this is a little bit sharper edge, and it's got just a little bit of flashing left on it from where the two parts of the mold originally came together. So somewhere on here, this is probably it. This looks like it might be the injection sprue. Looking very closely here, we see what looks like the injection sprue, and we can kind of see why, because it's got these rings around it. That's the cooling plastic that is pooling right around this, and then there would have been some tool that just cut that off and removed it from the rest of the part. This was probably made on a sprue with 6 or 8 of these at a time, so there should be, although I can't really see it, I guess that's it. So that's probably connecting to a second one. And then what would have happened is there would have been these stainless steel pins inside the mold, which would have ejected this thing out. So the mold closes, the thing gets filled with hot plastic, and then one part of the mold opens back up. And in order to get this part out of the mold, these 3 stainless steel pins would have pushed out of the mold and pushed the cooling part out into the bucket to go on to future modification. So based on what we learned about this mold, we know that the next thing that we can do, hey, look at that, you can see a little bit of the original master. Looks like it may have been 3D printed. That's what those lines sort of indicate. Of course, this is really messy. This is because they gang molded it and they made lots and lots of copies of the original master, and they did those copies sloppy. So everything that was part of the machining of every one of those copies sort of ended up in this final product. It's just really slapdash quality. We can assume that if I make a silicone mold, the first thing I'll want to do is I'll want to be able to suspend the nut in that mold. And so what I want is I want to put the screw in right to the distance of where the nut is suspended. And that will allow me to kind of know how far deep it should go. So I know that when I have an empty mold, I can attach this nut to the end, right to the end, and I can put this screw into the mold, and when I cast my material, it will cast right around where that nut is supposed to be. And I'll do a little bit of mold release on the bolt, not on the nut, but just on the bolt, so that I can then unscrew the bolt and I'll have a part that looks very much like this. Okay, I have some clean clay that I'm going to clean up, and clean clay is the clay I always use for mold making. It's recyclable. I use it over and over and over again. I've probably had this little bit of clean clay for over a decade, I'm sure. And, you know, it gets little bits of silicone from previous molds in it, and there's little bits of crap. And so if you just sort of work it, stretch it out, then you'll usually find all that stuff and be able to get rid of it. As long as it doesn't get contaminated with sulfur, then it is fine to reuse and reuse for a long time. So I've conditioned this clay quite a bit. It's pretty clean clay. This is a very simple mold. Cut all that out, and then I'll cut around it. I'll probably make my mold no more than like 10 millimeters, 9 millimeters around, something like that. Get out of my light here. Now there's a lot of cleanup to do. This is just a piece of brass. I've rolled the edges a little bit. Makes a good knife for cutting through clay. I basically use this for all of my nice clean square cuts. It's not sharp, but sharp enough for clay, and it's a good tool for kind of flattening things out, cleaning things up. Those and this. Time for a leak guard, and I've talked about this in other videos, but a leak guard is just a little lip in my mold that makes sure that the mold isn't going to leak, at least not as easily. This is a gravity-fed mold, so it's just a liquid resin, a urethane plastic that will fill the mold, and so you don't need much to stop it from leaking. You just need a little bit of extra, and you know, it's more of an aesthetic thing in some ways. This mold's not going to be under any pressure other than just the pressure of gravity. It's not like it's going to be filled with lots and lots and lots of plastic, but there's something nice about a mold that has a leak guard on it. It just feels complete, and it also is a good way to add registration. Just make sure that it doesn't slide sideways. Speaking of registration, this is where I would put a bunch of little registration keys in. And for this kind of thing, I like to put the registration right there in my leak guard. And I'll just make sure that my pattern is a little bit unusual so that I can easily identify how the mold is supposed to go together later. There we go. A couple of things that are nice and obvious. Ways to align it. Yeah, that'll do fine. Then maybe I'll just make a little indentation here. Just a little obvious marker. So now I have to think about my mold walls, and I was thinking of using this plastic cup because it's probably about the right height that once I put my screw in here, and this will be about the right height. I always keep my blades stored backwards because it goes in my toolbox and I don't want to stab myself when I'm digging around in there. All right. So there's that, and then that will go above it. I'll probably build up some clay around it and set this up so that the silicone sort of top layer comes just to the bottom of the screw. So I know that when I suspend the screw and the nut in the mold, that first there's enough area on the screw shaft that will sort of hold that screw in the correct place. And it's not going to tip or do anything weird. Plus, it's going to be at the right level when the screw is all the way down to the silicone. So I'll set that in there, and I just need to build up the walls a little bit. I want to be good and careful that I don't screw up what I've already made. About that height. So I think what I'll do is I'll just leave that as sort of a extra height thing. I'm probably putting too much effort into this mold for this silly little part, but I think it's good to show how to properly make a mold for something that's worthwhile. Just because this thing isn't really worth all this effort doesn't mean that the thing you're doing isn't worth all this effort. All right, that should work. Now, I'm not going to push this down just yet because one of the things that I want to be able to do is get a brush in there around with silicone and get the silicone into all those little registration points. And then I'll put this down and I'll cover the whole thing, pour silicone over the whole thing.
Well, sadly, my camera did not record the next little bit of footage where I show how to make a mold. It's the same kind of silicone mold that I've made in previous videos, so just click the little card up here in the corner and it'll take you to some place that'll show you how to make that mold.
Okay, here's the big test. I already cut away all the excess that was left over. Ooh, a bolt is warm. That has accepted the heat from the curing resin, that's for sure. I imagine this time it'll work quite a bit better. I might still have some bubbles up near the top, but as long as there's enough meat on there, I think it'll be good. That's not too bad. It definitely has a bubble. Look at that. Uh-oh. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to carefully cut away just enough of that and see if I can't fill it with more plastic. Basically, I'll just have a little wall around the area that I want to fill. Let's see if I can snip it away with scissors. There. There is also a bubble here, and I see that this one is a little bit more of a problem. You can see that it includes the shaft. In fact, these bubbles are connected. So I'll pack that with a little bit of clay, and then I'll pour some plastic in it. Pretty much all done. I'll sand it down and I'll pull the clay out, and that'll be that. Here's the broken one. Here's the one I copied. And here's my copy. Just got to get that flashing off. Usually just scraping it with a fingernail is enough. Got my bolt hole. This is still slightly warm and just barely soft, so I'm going to give it 10 more minutes. Then I'm going to put my bed back together. All right, so that has to get in there somehow with that screw coming through the back. Wish me luck. This will be the hardest part.
And so that's how you can save $28 with only 6 hours of work. If you liked the video, click below, on the little like button, and maybe subscribe. Click the little bell icon. Do all the things. Share the video. It helps me. Maybe it helps friends. Hi, Sabrina. Can you even see her? She's so dark, and I'm wearing a black shirt. Look how cute. Look how cute. Look at this old lady. Comment below. Let me know about your own futon adventures. If you like this kind of content, check out my Patreon. All right. Thanks, everybody. Oh, yeah, and here's another video right here. Check this out. Right there.